So with all of that said, I'd like to introduce Dr. Madalyn Murray O'Hare to you, and she has some words about atheists.
Thank you very much. How do you know that what I'm going to say is going to be good? Thank you very much. John left out the most important thing that he could possibly say, and that is, he is John G. Murray, my son. He is also the president of American Atheists. I'm 74, and I retired when I was 65, about 9 years ago. And since that time, of course, he has gracefully permitted me to work at the American Atheist Center 12 to 14 hours a day. For 30 years or more, I have known atheists, and I'm going to tell you today what you are. And I hope that you will understand what I have to say. An atheist lives, not of his own volition, in a distinct majoritarian environment, and in which environment he is in personal isolation, and his intellectual and emotional suffering is heightened hourly throughout every day. He can never forget that he's an atheist. The surrounding religious world in which he is engulfed stifles him in every outreach, interfering with his personal relationships, his economics, and his community life. His entire world is conditioned on a philosophical foundation which he necessarily repudiates. At the same time, he is forced to maintain an exterior appearance of compliance therewith. The atheist is treated in every social situation in accordance with theistic concepts which have nothing to do with his ideas of self-worth, intelligence, scientific, or human values. Most frequently, he finds himself substantially isolated from any other human or other contact intellectually. He can find no literature which supports his own arrived-at conclusions in respect to religion. He can speak to no other man. There is danger of excommunication from the human community if he lets his position be known. Most frequently, he knows that he must identify with the culture in which he finds himself. If he is above the average culture of his particular friends, family, educational group, or community, and his excellence in his job performance calls attention to him, he must be even more circumspect in his speech and behavior so as not to call attention to his inner ideas. His most immediate and enduring problem is one of intellectual isolation. His primary compulsion is to perfectly perfect his ability to deceive, to be perceived as one with his employment peers, his family, his social class, his community. The more advanced he attains, the more important that his shield of deceit be honed to fine quality. He is measured by a yardstick not of his choosing, but one which he inwardly loathes, yet to which he finds he must conform and with which he must identify. The atheist is forced to pretend that the unfolding history of the world, particularly of Western civilization, is based on the loving tenets of religion, while privately he is deeply convinced that the history reveals a brutal suppression of humankind by religion. He abhors the manifestation in current culture of what he considers to be antiquated and inhuman ideas. Yet he recognizes his own impotence in the face of the culture which has been swallowed up by those ideas. The atheist is convinced that the world would not today be enveloped in the problems it has if atheism had been the philosophic foundation upon which civilization was predicated. Yet he has no proof of this, no ability to even point out the harm which religion has done, for every in-depth study of history is manifestly an evaluation of the benefits derived from the domination of religion through the ages of man. The attitudes and opinions of the masses of people, as well as the ruling classes, have been formulated on religious premises and so enculturated as to be beyond inspection. The problems facing the 20th century atheists are how to deal with this isolation while maintaining his own ideas of his own self-worth. How to challenge the overwhelming dominance of religion in all of the cultures of the world. How to effectively engage in agitation for reform of the intellectual climate, and how to keep from going mad in the theological milieu in which he is immersed. The 24-hour-a-day overweening consideration of what to do in the face of attacks upon the intelligence of the atheist constitutes a continuing problem for him. He is bombarded with religious propaganda. The airways, radio, and television bring a constant message. The churches in his community are relentless in their assault. Friends, relatives, fellow employees, acquaintances, and business associates reinforce the idea of the dominant religion which he conceives as, and rightly so, he conceives as insane. Newspapers and magazines are in various degrees saturated with religious folklore, religious advertisements, religious emphasis. Seldom or never does he see a reinforcement of his own ideas or of the harm that religion has done historically or is currently doing, either in nations, communities, or individual lives. Religion, when it appears, is exalted. There are either no, only defamatory, or fragmentary negative stories concerned with atheism or atheists. The atheist is most often confronted with ideas of self-loathing. If his parents, one or both, are religious, he fully understands that in rejecting their religion, the parents will understand that he is rejecting them, their life values, their lifestyles. Not wanting to risk a rupture in parental relationships, the atheist again is forced into deceit. He cannot confront his parents with his ideas. He cannot openly repudiate that which was of most value to them in their lives, religion. In doing so, he would also force them to recognize that they had failed as parents insofar as they had not transmitted their most important life value to their offspring. When disclosure is made, the result is most often devastating. Mutual trust is gone forever from that relationship. A similar situation develops when an atheist has a child. Usually, in order to placate a religious spouse or parents, the children are sent by the atheist to Sunday school and affiliated with a selected church. After years of indoctrination into the religion, with what the child presumes is the asset of the atheist parent, who has not revealed his true intellectual stance, the child, when he finds out that his parent is an atheist, is at least dismayed, more often alienated from the parent for the many years of gross deceit. Marriage relationships are the ultimate trap, since sex becomes a weapon against the atheist. He dare not reveal his mindset, since it would interfere with a relationship, particularly it would interfere with his sex life. Dutifully and deceitfully, the atheist will engage in whatever religious life his spouse, or if homosexual, his partner, enunciates. In all of these relationships, the atheist seethes inside with discontent, most of which is transformed to an unhealthy psychological bent, which finally he must direct inward. He has nowhere else to send the message. And this involves then self-criticism, self-castigation, ultimately even with some atheists, self-loathing. The atheist has no one to whom he can turn. He sees other components of society where group recognition has brought some surcease of sorrow. There are those who can physically identify because of sex, because of race. The black man is quite obviously not alone. Women can identify one with another, as can the Hispanic or children. Geographically, the Indian masses, the blacks fighting apartheid, Eskimos, American Indians, can combine to fight for specific goals or against specific gross injustices. Those who are work-affiliated can do likewise. Union workers, farm workers, factory workers, and more recently those of specific sexual orientation, the gays have found clout in combining. And when it gets to fantasy ideas, there can still be affiliation there, because we have the Roman Catholics together, and the Muslims, and the Protestants and the Jews, and they can in unity show their strength. But the lone, cowed atheist in each one of these groups is terrified to speak out, fearful of identification, since he cannot endure the consequences of his actions, which generally is to be repelled by that group. A lone atheist, isolated in a large city, a rural community, a suburban area, in an institution, a school, a prison, or in the armed forces, has no group with which he can overtly identify. The religion-saturated culture permits none. There are no telling identification marks for him, so that he may recognize one of his own among all others in his community or in his group. The atheist comes to his intellectual position unaided. He usually finds first a religious precept in his life which he questions. He finds no one with an honest answer, no one who will explain it. He then seeks an answer himself, and I'm talking to every one of you here. And his inquiry may broaden somewhat, but he cannot go very far, since resources are not available. Man, being a social animal, does not care to be alienated from the rest of his species. The atheist desires societal and familial contacts, yet he jeopardizes his aspiration if he permits his thoughts to be openly expressed. This is a kind of unique suffering that only you atheists know. One mind, wandering alone, seeking other compatible minds, but finding none to contact, having no place to rest. Social degradation is a specter that haunts the atheist. Discrimination against him is an assurance, not a threat. He must remain silent out in the human community at all costs. Other pressures are upon him in every direction he reaches. His intellectual segregation is almost complete by custom and habits of the era, the geography, and the culture in which he lives. The atheist finds that he must develop communication sets which are safe. He turns to a fine art his ability to talk about the pseudo-sports of the nation, football, basketball, baseball. He spends his intellect on trivia so that he can have relationships that are shallow with the religious, artfully evading constantly that which is closest to his heart. He knows he is victimized. He knows he is tyrannized by the culture. His unsupported word, if he should voice it, is immediately and overwhelmingly disputed in every relationship. He finally overtly abandons the fight because he does not desire that it shall lead to a rupture in any of the fragile relationships which he has so painfully and at such great cost put together. He most frequently, when he feels impelled to the issue, supports a state-church separation argument, but never on the basis of atheism. The arguments of teaching evolution, creationism in the public school are a prime example. Through thousands of pages of legal documents, and I have read them all, and millions of words in print covering the vicious fight over this issue during the last 70 years in the United States, not once has creationism simply been identified for what it is, a basic voodoo tenet of Judeo-Christianity. In fact, the religious community itself cannot see that such is the case, and often diverse religions will press forward the absurd contention that each of the 6 days of creation were eons of time. The same anomaly is brought abroad in the land in respect to abortion. This is simply and only a religious fight. Nowhere is this confronted or recognized. Both sides go to extreme lengths to couch the argument pro and con in anything other but religious language. The atheist is aghast to see diverse religious denominations on both sides of the fray. It amazes him that no one on either side recognizes that abortion is not the issue. He alone sees that with adequate sex education, adequate birth control information, the problems associated with abortion would diminish until it would no longer be significant in the culture. The atheist is forced into a logic warp to support his preference on anything but his basic atheism. In the argument to prevent full-scale religious activities, such as prayer, Bible reading, hymn singing, testimonials to the Lord, in the public schools in America, the atheist focuses his objection on the First Amendment principle of state-church separation, rather than saying that he is basing it on the absurdity, the futility, and the insanity of religious teaching. There is no criticism of religion itself. Please point to me any institution, even including the ACLU, which says religion is no damn good. Even in every defining battle in every case across the nation, and we have them all in the American Atheist Library, no one ever says prayer is nonsense, and that's why it should not be in schools. And when we grab at the First Amendment, this of course leads one to wonder just exactly why the Founding Fathers thought that there was a need for separation of church and state. If religion is the panacea for the ills of the nation, if not for the world, the First Amendment should have called for the marriage of Judeo-Christianity and government, not their separation. Alternately, if advanced now, the First Amendment was proposed and accepted only as a means to keep government out of religion? Was this not based on fear of exposure of the fraud of religion when faced with government supervision, with government regulation? To sum up, the atheist is faced with the indisputable fact that the entire culture of the nation is predicated on Judeo-Christianity, since that thought process is in dominance. It matters little or not at all that even half of the nation, not even one half, has ever professed to be practicing Judeo-Christians. That the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of government, the education and the cultural aspects of the nation are firmly in the ranks of religion is the compelling consideration for the atheist. Another of the isolating factors for atheists is that they come from all parts of the culture, having varied education, are part of varied socioeconomic situations, reflect varied ethnic endowments, and endorse varied political convictions. A factory working class stiff cannot adjust himself in the rarefied atmosphere of the psychiatrist, nor can a university professor intellectually relate to a gravedigger. A heterosexual male cannot bring himself to enter into rapport with a homosexual. Each would not be comfortable or acceptable in the home of the other. The lacto-vegetarian atheist is seen as a fruitcake by the healthy beef-eating atheist. The atheist enjoying a glass of wine at lunch is held in disgust by the teetotaler. An associated socio-culture system must be predicated on atheism. So we do have values that reach across all these fields. They must be defined and accepted before any hopes of unity can be had. Atheism per se, as it is seen in the United States today, is not sufficiently a tie that binds. Since the full base outreach of atheism has never been permitted development, artificial and rigid obstacles being firmly in place, it is inimical to a militarist who is an atheist that another, even though that person is an atheist, would support world peace. However, given a chance to develop the thesis that there is only life, and to extrapolate on that, it is more than conceivable that atheists will come someday to a unison of opinion on this and say that the only thing that there can be in this considered and unanimous opinion is that the mass destruction of human lives in wars is a religious, not an atheist idea. However, as long as the religious idea of life after death is a preponderant one, men will die for God and country in full anticipation of that afterlife, willingly sacrifice the only lives they know or have to attain an eternal existence, which is a fantasy. Atheists also have a view of history before them. They have been ruthlessly exterminated by dominant religions in every culture in all ages of man. The ability to elude the ultimate punishment of death has been thousands of years in the attaining. In most bitter seasons of strife, necessarily fear is and has been an endemic attribute of atheism. Yet those brave men and women who did perish in the fight are generally unknown to the modern atheist, who has been essentially stripped of your history. You have been stripped of your heroes. You don't know them at all. They died in vain. The atheist has no social institutions to which he can point with pride. For anything created by an atheist, and our culture has only moved forward because atheists have had such creative ideas. But anything that has been created by an atheist has been historically attributed to the dominant Judeo-Christian culture. That an atheist may have initiated or developed a measure of social benefit is not attributed to his underlying atheist value system, which quite frequently he does not let be known, but rather it is attributed to his philanthropic attitude, which was developed by him, by his reliance upon the Judeo-Christian ethic of his times. He cannot win the game. Had he not been nurtured and natured on Judeo-Christianity, this is seriously proposed that he would not have attained to the level of human social consciousness necessary to recognize a social problem or implement a solution if he had really been an atheist. It does not help that the atheist in question most probably escaped from his loneliness in the dominant religion. In order to be accepted, he must have been most circumspect, permitting his motives to be viewed as being based entirely on Judeo-Christian considerations. What bitter frustration and intercontradictions often this has caused. The atheist pays with ostracism if he admits his atheism. He pays with shame for his lack of courage if he does not. He pays with isolation or deprivation of cultural conduct and contacts, or he pays with his own knowledge of his own deceit in order to retain the association of persons with whom he is basically in disagreement. Atheists generally come to know one another by chance. Often their association one with another are fleetings, since their bases in the culture are not homogeneous. They are, as I have indicated, culturally separated by more than their atheism, since they have never been free to develop their own social value system. The problem then becomes one of how to force recognition of the worth of the atheist, how to attain the advance of acceptance for him in the human community, how to guard against regression of his position, or the simple, overwhelming overshadowing of atheists by the Judeo-Christian community, given the current and future power of the electronic industry. Actually, the atheist realizes that there must not only be an acceptance of his right to hold his opinion, but that ultimately his is the job to turn the culture from religion, to eliminate those irrational ideas which have held the human race in thrall, which have held the human race in intellectual slavery. Unfortunately, the ability to affect the culture still is predicated on the use of wealth and political power. Political power is simply the manipulative use of wealth. And also, we need an outreaching education to the mass of humankind. The atheist few, scattered, intellectually cowed, driven by fears of ostracism, have never had and do not now have these weapons at hand. Even unto death, the atheist's atheism takes a price. If upon his death the atheist desires that his inner life be recognized, those who survive him in his immediate circle, be they family, friends, or members of the social order, frequently thwart his desires. If an open atheist, tales of his deathbed renunciation of atheism are immediately circulated. If a hidden atheist, religious services are heaped upon his body. And in our culture and in our organization, the wives send us pictures of open caskets with the atheists a Bible in hand. Often the solution of the atheist has been to seek to duplicate the outreach of religion. We have this constantly, to propose that there be atheist almhouses, atheist orphan homes, atheist soup kitchens, atheist foster homes, to prove to the populace at large that atheists care. This, in fact, proves nothing but that there are philanthropic feelings in all persons, and that the religious institutions have not been able to stifle them. Judeo-Christianity has, with the help of the ruling class and government, simply usurped such functions with a false display of humanitarian concern to improve their own image for what is inherent in all humankind, not alone in the religious. The atheist often has another private and personal attempt at solution. He rationalizes his own individual position as exceptional. In the quiet of his mind, he feels his outward demeanor, his acceptance of the religion around him, is a grip in which he is caught and must endure, while all the while, intellectually, inside, he sets himself apart. But he cannot carry the burden of that position alone, in isolation. He is assaulted on all sides by the negation of the idea, and, as I said, sometime finally succumbs to self-loathing. Then he starts to hammer on the door of religion. He wants to be accepted as equal to the religious. He advocates associating with religious leaders for mutual benefit in the community. He longs to stand side by side on equal status with the minister, the priest, and the rabbi. Do you know how much trouble I get in? I am called for a television show, and when I get there, they say, well, now, we're going to have a priest, a minister, a rabbi, and you. I said, no, you're not. If you had a brain surgeon in here, would you call in a witch doctor to sit down with him? And I walk off the set. John alienated 50 or 60 atheists in one evening. He went on a television program. A priest came in with that backward collar and the black dress. They wear black to mourn for their dead brains. This priest comes up to glad hand Garth, holds out his hand, and Garth says to them, you are an enemy of humankind. I will not touch you. I cannot recognize you. I will not shake hands with you. Wham! 60 atheist members walk out because we haven't been kind, love-filled, considerate, and understanding. So, if nothing else, the atheist wants to challenge the religious leader then in debate. But unfortunately, this is always on the grounds of religion, the Bible. The debate, he feels, must be between equals. It does not dawn on the atheist that the minister, the rabbi, the priest, and the guru are intellectually inferior to him. As he seeks understanding and recognition, the judgment of the atheist is sometimes impaired. Hence, it is almost impossible to obtain a consensus of atheists. They are basically ignorant of the tenets of their predicated principles. They are ignorant of the ramifications of them. They are ignorant of the intent and purpose, quite frequently, of an outreach organization. There is a widespread ignorance in the atheist community of their overall plight, of the undoubted existence of sheer malevolence, which is and has been directed against them. Let me go back briefly. Most atheists have come to atheism by being assaulted with the irrationality of religious precepts, and usually they stumble upon something, and usually it's in the Bible. With any further study, they find the Bible is shocking, barbaric, anti-intellectual, and if they grasp it completely, idiotic. Yet they have no one to question. When they challenge their minister, this is a closed avenue. The ministerial retort is an admonition to accept through faith that which cannot be accepted through reason. So the atheist seeks elsewhere. But there are no books in libraries, no atheist books. There are no atheist books in schools, none in colleges, none in universities. There are none for sale in the contemporary scene. Bookstores. How many have you ever walked into Walden's and said, "Give me an atheist book," and got it? Bookstores do not stock atheist books. Everything is covert. The culture in which the atheist is wrapped is a result of inherited customs, of irrational actions of men who control the thoughts, the idea, and the deeds of the many. The majority against the atheist is powerful, steeped in tens of thousands of years of controlled history and controlled learning. The atheist has often attempted counter moves. Trivial as they have been, atheists have tried to organize, to collect resources, to teach the few others they can uncover and reach. But the road is long. The job is difficult. It is ill-financed. The reprisals are psychological, at least, economic, most often physical. There are 25 million atheists in the United States, and of this, most of them have lapsed into apathy vis-a-vis religion. They see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. They escape into a mental limbo, which has been a major curse of the human race. Apathy. They live as if they see no evil in religion, hear no evil about religion, and they speak no evil of religion. They seek neither recognition of atheism or justice for atheists. They get along. Now and again, an emboldened atheist leader rises who will not plead either for justice or recognition. He will demand it as a right. And again, this places the ordinary atheist on the defensive. He lacks training, intellectual and educational habits because he is a part of the Christian culture. Extreme plans fade with him to a more moderate counsel. Boy, what you think about in your bedroom at night and what you do in the job in the morning. There are efforts to sustain a group which then usually is small. For example, in Los Angeles, I'm speaking in California, a city of 3 million, a group of 30 atheists will meet and congratulate themselves that they have gained some ground simply because they know one another. This is patently absurd. If the atheists cease to agitate, if they cease to resist oppression, it will grow this religious culture on us to be accepted as normal and inevitable. And what is needed is concentrated planning by the atheists. The cost of any assault upon the majoritarian religious culture must fall first and primarily on the atheist. It's ridiculous to think that any part of the majoritarian culture will finance a program which it fears and rejects. We're never going to get any money from IBM. We're never going to get a grant from any part of the United States government. Atheism was deliberately set up by the government as an enemy of our nation for many decades after World War II, because our nation was confronting the evil empire of atheistic communism with the Christian capitalist front. Indeed, the implosion of the USSR is given as a result, and how many of you have read this, as a result of the evils of atheism. This is why the USSR fell. And it is easy for the dominant Judeo-Christian culture to dismiss atheism in the United States with both a shrug and a laugh. It is, however, possible that this small part of the culture which is organized, not the 25 million who remain unorganized. But it is possible that a small part of this atheist culture, which is organized, could become important and wield power so that its influence could be felt. Religion dominates our entire culture. The government, education, intellectual life, politics, the judiciary system, the arts, architecture, city planning. Well, this is a small job. We are now in a season of change. And as we seize the window of opportunity for the last time presenting itself, we either do it or we must lose forever as religion tightens its grip on every country in the world. Religions will persist for generations, and therefore careful and intelligent action against it must be planned. The plan of action must be taken to take over the basis of the culture of the future. Nothing else will suffice. One method of attaining this is continued agitation, protest, propaganda toward that end. We must, on the other hand, have an unmolested and unthreatened chance for free and favorable development. And this is not available in the United States. The picture in our nation is grim. We cannot let our future remain largely in the hands of religious majority, or we cannot permit it to remain to be changed by chance, accident, or situation. We need careful, thoughtful, and intelligent planning. We must make it possible for atheists to await ultimate intellectual emancipation for the population. And we must do this with reasoned patience, with equitable temper, with every possible effort to raise the social status and increase the efficacy of the group. This is not an effort toward cooperation with religion or incorporation into the religious group, but rather for its complete overthrow and elimination from our culture. We need atheist teachers, atheist courses in elementary, high school, colleges, and universities. We need large social contact with atheists. We cannot come about into this intellectual freedom until we have developed our own cadre, for those of you who have been in the Army, for training and education of atheists. There is needed quicker acculturation. Right now, if atheist courses were introduced into public schools, its teachers would not receive decent treatment, nor would the students receive a real education in atheism. And this is not the fault of religion, because there are no courses in atheism available, no course outlines, no regimes of atheist education, no lesson plans, no textbooks, no reference resources. All of this must be organized. Ethical teaching, character building, organized charity, neighborliness are all concentrated in the churches. And yet, to quote one of the black men of our nation who has been a hero of mine, the churches are seats of senseless dogma and meaningless ceremonies, together with a multitude of activities which have no social significance and lead to no social betterment. All of his work is ahead of the atheist. He has not as yet been given a chance to fight. He must himself make that chance, seize it, and do what is necessary. No advance will ever be given to him. Knowing whence he came, knowing how bad it is, no matter that he knows where he is now, he must make the decision for the present. And in making that decision for the present, he makes it for the future. This is what American atheists have been about for the last 30 years. The story is told of Atlas that he said, "Give me a place to stand and I can lift the world." the atheist must make his own place to stand, and he then will still have the chore of lifting the world. And so it is that given the recognition of his problems, and I've enumerated them here, and you know what I have been saying applies to all of you, each and every one. The atheist must abandon his defensive positions, take up the cudgels, and go forward rather than into the retreat of apathy. He must let the blows fall where they may. My father fought for the rights of the working man, incidentally, although he was a general contractor, a civil engineer. And as long as he lived, he fought for the working man. He would only hire union men in his company. I was reared in a home that loved and respected labor leaders. And one of the heroes I knew about from the time I was wee was Joe Hill. That is Joe Höglund, a Swede who became an American labor leader and a songwriter. He was known first as Joseph Hillstrom, and then simply he became known as Joe Hill. He was born in 1879 and he migrated to the United States in 1901. And he became active in the Industrial Workers of the World, the union movement, in 1910. He helped the IWW organize strikes, and for that he was executed by the state on a trumped-up charge of murder in 1915 at age 31. He was a hero of the radical labor movement in the United States, a hero of my father and a hero of mine. And really, I have nothing to say about him. But what I want to talk about is Ralph Chapin. On the occasion of Joe Hill's death, Ralph Chapin wrote a poem about him. And the title of that poem is "Mourn Not the Dead." I'm 74 years old now. I'm diabetic, and I'm in really rotten health. And I hang on to life, for there is nothing else that I can do but hang on and fight. And I'll die too. And this poem expresses my feeling about my own death. And I admonish you that when I do die, you should say, "Mourn not the dead." And this is important. Essentially, even though you do not know your own history, you do not know your own heroes, they have all been butchered by Judeo-Christianity. I give the advice of the last stanza of this three-stanza poem of Ralph Chapin to all atheists everywhere now. I've had this printed into a bookplate, and it is on every book that I own. Mourn not the dead, but rather mourn the apathetic throng, the cowed and the meek, who see the world's great anguish and its wrong, and dare not speak. This is what is wrong with the atheist movement, not alone in the United States, but in the world. Atheists feel that they dare not speak, and that is wrong. Knowing what we are, knowing how it is, knowing that the worst may come, atheists must speak out. And I invite them all to join American atheists in that fight. All anybody has to do is call information in Austin, Texas, and say, "I want the telephone number of Madalyn Murray O'Hare," and let's get into the fray. We must dare to speak.
I'll get it.